Welcome to this explainer. Usually when we hear about a new multi-billion-dollar bullet train, we just think, awesome, faster weekend trips. But today, we're diving into a massive infrastructure project in Japan to uncover the surprising truth about how mega infrastructure actually shapes local communities. Most of us think about new trains and highways purely as marvels of engineering, but today we're going to look at the fascinating human and civic layers that sit right underneath the concrete.
Picture this, your absolute soul-crushing 90-minute daily commute suddenly dropping to the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. Just 25 minutes. That is the dramatic promise of the Chuo Shinkansen superconducting maglev train. It's designed to connect Tokyo to Nagoya, shooting right through a brand new station in Yamanashi Prefecture, specifically in the area of Kofu. Now, if you live in Kofu, suddenly being less than half an hour away from one of the biggest, most vibrant metropolitan economies on Earth sounds like an absolute game-changer, doesn't it? It feels like the ultimate economic lottery ticket.
Now, most of us would naturally assume a high-speed railway is an automatic win for a local city. We tend to view it as a simple binary, right? It either brings massive economic revival or a city just fades into irrelevance. But researchers in Kofu are asking a much deeper, far more complex question. Does that intense new connection act like a giant magnet, pulling immense wealth and opportunity in? Or, and this is the scary part, does it act like a massive vacuum, sucking local vitality, talent, and resources out? This isn't just about moving people from point A to point B. It's about what happens to the place they leave behind and the place they arrive.
All right, here's how we're going to break down this urban planning puzzle today. We'll be looking at 1. The high-speed maglev transition. 2. The single metric trap. 3. 6 domains of well-being. 4. 5 local conversion architectures. 5. The anticipation lock-in. And finally, number 6, implementing the well-being check. By the end of this, we'll reveal how local municipal policy is actually the key to surviving the arrival of a massive transit project.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the high-speed maglev transition, or as researchers call it, the exogenous amplifier.
The absolute crucial thing to understand here is that the train's route, its massive multi-trillion yen cost, and its development timeline are determined entirely externally by the railway company, not by the local city of Kofu. What this means in practice is that the railway is really just a backdrop. It's kind of like a giant spaceship landing right in your backyard, and you literally have zero say over where it parks, what fuel it uses, or when it opens its doors. Researchers call this an agency deficit. The local government simply cannot change the physics, the route, or the underlying mechanics of the maglev.
Because of that agency deficit, the train acts as an amplifier, not a magic switch. It doesn't magically turn a struggling town into a booming metropolis overnight. No, it simply takes whatever is already going on in that town and cranks the volume all the way up to 11. Compressing travel time just blows the doors wide open on people's choices. Think about your favorite local bakery. Does the new train mean they can easily ship their artisanal bread to high-end Tokyo restaurants? Or does it mean their local regulars now just buy bread in Tokyo before commuting home? A municipality really has to step up and decide proactively if that intense access will extract local wealth or expand local capabilities.
Which leads us to ask, how do we actually measure if a massive transit hub is helping? Welcome to Section 2, the single metric trap, which is basically when up actually means down.
If we're only looking at the number of passengers swiping through a turnstile or the total income of a region, we might be flying completely blind to the actual lived reality of the people there. It's a really dangerous trap. We could be popping champagne, celebrating a place's hollowing out as a massive success just because the total economic output looks phenomenal on a spreadsheet. Meanwhile, we're totally ignoring the real local impacts, like the displacement of long-term residents and the slow decay of local community ties.
Let's look at how this multidimensional divergence actually plays out in practice. Say land values around the new station absolutely skyrocket. To an outside investor, that looks like conventional success, right? The graph goes up. But if you live there, that higher land value actually means housing becomes incredibly unaffordable. The essential workers, the nurses, the school teachers, the grocery clerks, they can get entirely priced out of their own neighborhoods. That displaces locals and shatters their psychological rootedness. Or think about a massive spike in Tokyo commuting. Sure, it's great for raising the town's average income, but it severely weakens the daytime local community. The traditional economic metrics go up, but the actual quality of life takes a nosedive.
So how do we avoid this trap? Researchers in Kofu have applied a powerful new tool. Let's look at Section 3, 6 domains of well-being, also known as the AFW framework. The anti-fragile well-being framework completely forces city planners to look way past just the economy. You can't just check the economic growth box and call it a day. Instead, you have to read a city's capability across 6 completely irreducible domains simultaneously: health, psychological flourishing, social connection, civic engagement, economic security, and environmental quality. You have to look at the whole shebang all at once. For example, you can't truly claim you have economic security if chasing it literally destroys your environmental quality or ruins people's psychological flourishing. They have to rise together. What matters in this framework isn't just how much raw growth there is, but exactly where that growth is going and who it's actually serving.
All right, let's connect these ideas to actual on-the-ground city planning. Here is Section 4, 5 local conversion architectures, or the mechanisms of change.
Think of these 5 local conversion architectures: mobility, land and housing, economic, social reproduction, and agency, as the actual engine room of local policy. These are the nuts and bolts mechanisms that take that raw, high-speed market access from the Maglev and convert it into real, durable well-being for the folks living there. For instance, lands and housing architecture directly moves the domains of economic security and psychological flourishing by locking in affordable housing protections. Mobility architecture decides if you can actually reach local civic life or if you're just being funneled straight onto a highway out of town. The real magic here is that, unlike the train itself, these 5 architectures are things the local municipality actually has the power to control and build.
Let me give you a super specific example. The plans for the new station infrastructure heavily feature a smart interchange connecting straight to the expressway, complete with a massive park and ride facility. Sounds amazing and super efficient for commuters, right? But researchers pointed out a fascinating paradox here. This kind of setup acts as a high-speed car funnel. It massively intensifies access if you drive, but it simultaneously excludes you if you don't. It forces everyone to rely on private cars, which then thins out funding and demand for local public transit, like neighborhood buses. Suddenly, if you don't own a car, your access to this magnificent, multi-billion-dollar train is severely cut off, isolating you even further.
Now you're probably thinking, hey, the city has plenty of time to sort this all out, right? The original 2027 target for the Maglev was abandoned, so there's no rush. Well, that brings us to Section 5, the anticipation lock-in, or basically the ticking clock.
Believe it or not, that uncertainty is actually the biggest danger of all, because anticipation is acting right this very second. Even though the actual launch date of the Maglev is floating out in the 2030s somewhere, speculators are swooping in and buying up cheap land today. Municipal zoning changes are happening today. The physical station building is slated to be finished around 2031, years before a single Maglev train will ever run on those tracks. This creates what's called an anticipatory lock-in. If a city just sits back and waits for the ribbon-cutting ceremony on opening day to start protecting its residents, they are already a decade too late. The landscape will have fundamentally shifted completely beneath their feet.
Because of that crazy ticking clock, planners are pushing for a vital principle. Interventions must deliver a present-tense benefit. Any policy or project tied to the Maglev needs to be useful right now. They call this phase-free infrastructure. Think of it like building a gorgeous, lush community park that just so happens to have a train station added to it later on, rather than pouring a massive barren concrete parking lot that sits completely useless for 10 years until the train finally arrives. You literally cannot ask a community to suffer through a decade of construction, displacement, and disruption for a theoretical promise that keeps getting delayed. The benefits have to be tangible today.
So how in the world does Kofu actually protect its people with all this pressure and uncertainty? Let's dive into our final piece, Section 6, implementing the well-being check.
The city is working incredibly hard to embed what's called a non-compensatory rule into their planning. And honestly, this is a total paradigm shift. It essentially means that all the money in the world flowing in from Tokyo tourists or massive spikes in local land value absolutely cannot legally or ethically justify destroying the local Southern Alps watershed or pushing essential care workers out of their homes. A win in the economic column cannot compensate for a critical loss in health or the environment. You just can't trade one basic human need for another to make the spreadsheet look prettier. You have to raise the baseline floor for everything altogether.
And the best part is they aren't just sitting in a boardroom theorizing about this stuff. Kofu is out there actively testing these ideas in real, live, downtown social experiments right now, way ahead of the station's completion. They're running these safe-to-fail probes, which basically means they're using their actual streets as a living laboratory. They're setting up temporary public spaces, redirecting traffic for a weekend, and literally co-developing a practical well-being and capability check with the residents themselves, right there on the sidewalk. They're gathering real stories and sensing true community needs. This way, before the final concrete is even poured for those permanent station plans, the rules of well-being are already hardwired into the city's DNA.
At the end of the day, we can't change the concrete trajectory of the Maglev train itself. That line is absolutely irreversible. But the biggest takeaway here is this: how do we make sure the policies we build around that train today leave us free to actually thrive tomorrow? By keeping local policies reversible, distributed, and laser-focused on true multidimensional well-being, communities like Kofu can make sure that when the future comes barreling in at 500 kilometers an hour, they aren't just a blur passing by the window. They're a thriving destination of their own making. So I want you to think about the major infrastructure projects happening in your own city right now. Are they being designed as a magic switch or an exogenous amplifier? We'll leave you to think about that one.